Every morning, long before the city stirred awake, Emily Sanchez slipped into her white apron under the soft glow of the Sunrise Bakery's kitchen lights. The hour was cruel, 4:30 a.m., when most were still tangled in dreams, but for Emily, it was sacred. In the rhythmic kneading of dough and the gentle rise of croissants in the oven, she found a kind of prayer. Yet, her devotion wasn't just to the pastry. There was something else that began each day with a quiet sense of urgency, a ritual so simple that most would overlook it, and so steady that even she no longer questioned it. By 5:15, the first batch was done: warm cinnamon rolls, delicate golden croissants, crusty sourdough. She moved efficiently, with the kind of grace born from years of repetition, but when the last tray settled into the display case, Emily would pause. She reached for a clean napkin, a small to-go container, and one of the pastries, always the best of the batch, never the leftovers. Then came the coffee, rich and dark, poured with the same care as if it were for a regular paying customer. She wrote a short note, the words always changing but the tone never did. "Wishing you peace today," or "the world still sees you." She'd fold the napkin around the pastry gently, as if wrapping a fragile gift. Out the back door she went, just past the bakery's loading ramp, toward the old wooden bench beside the 42nd Street bus stop. The man was already there, just as he always was. He didn't beg. He didn't speak. He never looked directly at her. But he was there, silver-haired, slumped but composed, in a tattered coat that had long surrendered its warmth. Emily never asked his name. She never offered hers. What passed between them was something quieter than conversation, a nod, a glance, a pause long enough to acknowledge presence. Then she would return to the kitchen before the bakery opened its doors. Her coworkers noticed, of course. At first, they joked. "There goes Saint Emily." Then came the criticisms, whispered with a smugness that only grew with time. "She's wasting good product," someone muttered. "One day he'll rob her blind." Emily heard them, but her silence was not weakness. She had learned long ago that defending kindness often cost more than giving it. What she couldn't understand was how they didn't see what she saw, not a homeless man, but a person. A person who sat in the cold without complaint, who met her gaze with quiet dignity. When new management arrived, their concern came wrapped in corporate pleasantries. "Emily, we admire your generosity," her supervisor had said, brows furrowed with the faux gravity of a man who'd never missed a meal. "But it's making some customers uncomfortable." The implication was clear. Charity was admirable, just not here. Not where it could be seen. She nodded, smiled, and then adjusted her routine. She began arriving earlier. 15 minutes made all the difference. Enough time to leave the food unnoticed. Enough time to be invisible. It wasn't until a new hire spotted her one morning, returning from her mission, as he mockingly called it, that the whispers grew louder. Emily heard them through the hum of mixers and the soft clatter of trays. "She's been doing this for 5 years," someone said to a customer. "Every single day." The customer's reply came with a tight-lipped pity. "Poor thing. Thinks she's making a difference." Emily kept rolling the dough, pressing it flat with calm precision. But the words clung to her apron like flour, invisible to others, inescapable to her. Not because she was ashamed. Not because she questioned her actions. But because it hurt, not to be judged, but to be surrounded by people who couldn't see the quiet enormity in a simple act of care. To them, kindness had to be earned. Deserved. Explained. She didn't know the man's story, but she knew his silence. She recognized the way he sat still, holding himself small, so as not to inconvenience the world. She saw the tension in his shoulders that never relaxed, even when the sun warmed his bench. She didn't need to know where he'd been to understand what he had endured. Some wounds were loud, but others, the ones that taught you to disappear, were nearly invisible. Emily saw them all the same. One morning, the rain came heavy, blown sideways by the wind. Emily's scarf, her favorite one, heavy and warm, the color of old wine, had been wrapped around her neck as she brought the usual package. She hesitated as she looked at him, soaked, shivering, still sitting upright with that stubborn, almost formal posture. Without a word, she took the scarf off and placed it next to the coffee. Their eyes met, and something in his face cracked open for a second. A flicker of gratitude too deep to surface in words. The next morning, tucked beneath the empty coffee cup, was a note, written in pencil, shaky but precise, on the back of a napkin. "Thank you for seeing me as a person." Emily folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her wallet. In that moment, it was worth more than any award, more than any promotion, more than being understood by those around her. Because for once, someone had said the thing she'd always hoped to believe, that the small, invisible things she did each morning mattered. That being seen, truly seen, was enough. The judgment didn't begin all at once. It came slowly, seeping in like cold through an old window, easy to ignore at first, a side glance, an arched brow, a pause in conversation when Emily entered the room. There were no outright confrontations, no shouting matches or public shaming. That would have been easier, almost a relief. Instead, it was the kind of judgment that cloaked itself in politeness, the way people smiled a little too tightly, or how her name was spoken with a certain patronizing lilt, like a child playing savior. "She means well," they'd say, always just loud enough for her to hear. The rest went unsaid. Emily felt it most acutely on the slow days at the bakery, when time stretched long and conversation filled the space between customers. A new employee once asked, not unkindly, "Why do you keep doing it, Em? He's just one guy. You really think it changes anything?" She could have given a dozen answers, but she said nothing. Not because she didn't have words, she had too many. But none of them would have landed in a place the boy could understand. It wasn't just about changing someone's life. It was about not abandoning your own sense of humanity, even when everyone around you learned to numb theirs. Her silence, in that moment, was not surrender, it was armor. Some mornings, as she walked to the bakery in the dark, she questioned herself. Not the act, never the act, but the burden of it. Why did it feel like such a fight to do something so small? Why did kindness require explanation, justification, defense? Her footsteps echoed in the quiet street like questions she couldn't answer. The man on the bench never asked for anything. And yet, his existence alone had become a provocation, not to her, but to those who needed the comfort of distance. People liked their suffering clean, contained, preferably out of sight. But Emily had placed it in full view, each morning, without fanfare. That they couldn't abide. It came to a head in a staff meeting on a gray Thursday. The regional manager had come in from corporate, a man in a charcoal suit with 2 white teeth and a binder full of numbers. He spoke of profit margins and brand perception. Then, delicately, as though he were sparing her feelings, he addressed the issue. "There's been concern," he said, fingers steepled, "about the daily food you give away. While we support community engagement, it can interfere with operations or affect how customers perceive us. We have a charity partnership for that. Approved channels." Emily sat very still. The words were bureaucratic, bloodless. But underneath them was the same old message: be kind, but not where it shows. Be generous, but only if it's been prepackaged and approved. Give, but don't disturb. She could feel her coworkers watching her, some with sympathy, some with relief, some with smug vindication. Emily felt heat rise in her chest, the quiet ache of being spoken to like a well-meaning child who had made a mess. She could have apologized. She could have smiled and nodded and complied. But something inside her, something anchored deeper than pride, held her upright. She met the manager's eyes. "He's a person," she said simply. "Not a PR problem." The silence that followed was thick, embarrassed. Someone cleared their throat. The manager's smile never wavered. "Of course. We're all human. But there are policies." Emily understood, then, that they would never get it. And she understood something else, that her actions had never needed their approval. The purpose of compassion was not to be understood. It was to be given anyway. She left the meeting with a strange kind of peace. There would be consequences, she knew. Maybe a warning. Maybe worse. But what mattered, what had always mattered, was the moment each morning when she handed over the coffee and pastry, when two people, invisible to the world in different ways, saw each other fully. The next day, she rose even earlier, not out of fear, but resolve. The rain had stopped, but the streets still gleamed with wet reflections. She packed the coffee, the pastry, and a fresh scarf, this one knitted with her own hands, soft and thick, the color of rust and earth. She placed it gently next to the bench, next to him. This time, he looked at her longer. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. She didn't need words. She had never needed words. Emily walked back to the bakery with wind in her hair and judgment at her back. Let them talk. Let them misunderstand. In a world that forgot how to look people in the eye, she would not look away. It was never about grand gestures. Their relationship didn't bloom in cinematic bursts of emotion or declarations, no dramatic revelations, no promises sealed in tears. It was quieter than that. Quieter and, in its own way, more enduring. A relationship not built through words, but through the small rituals of morning. The handing over of a warm pastry. The steam of coffee rising between their hands in the early chill. The way Emily would pause, just long enough to be seen, and the way he would look at her. Not with gratitude, not even expectation, but with recognition. They never exchanged names. She didn't need his, and he never asked for hers. At first, it felt like a gap. But over time, it became a kind of protection, not anonymity, but respect. Their bond didn't rely on the framework of identity. It lived in shared presence. He had a rhythm. Every morning, he sat at the same bench, always early, before the streets stirred fully awake. Emily began to time her mornings to him. If she was late, she walked faster. If he wasn't there, her chest tightened, a quiet dread she never voiced to anyone. But most days, he was there, wrapped in his layered coat, eyes distant but alert. She'd offer the food without speaking, and he would nod, once solemn. Sometimes their eyes met longer than necessary. In those seconds, there was a warmth that lingered in her long after she walked away. There were mornings when he surprised her. A small gesture, a newspaper folded carefully and left for her on the bench, a rock shaped like a heart resting beside her coffee cup one rainy day. No note, no explanation. Just a shared understanding that the world, harsh as it was, still allowed for small kindnesses. Those gifts meant more than most things people had ever said to her. Once, during an unusually cold December morning, she brought 2 pairs of thick wool socks in a brown paper bag. She didn't say why. She just set the bag down beside the coffee. He looked at it for a long moment before meeting her gaze. His mouth didn't move, but his eyes shimmered with something almost like disbelief, almost like grief. She felt it too, not sadness exactly, but the weight of what it meant to be cared for when you'd long stopped expecting it. Emily never told anyone about him. Not because she was ashamed she wasn't, but because some connections aren't meant to be dissected, explained, or reduced. They exist in a space outside normal conversation, too sacred for simplification. To speak of it would be to unravel it. And so, she held it inside like a candle cupped against the wind. When he wasn't there one morning, a strange hollowness crept into her. She stood by the bench longer than usual, pastry and coffee still in hand. People passed her by without looking. The bench was just a bench again. It was absurd, she thought, how absence could feel so loud. He returned 3 days later, thinner, eyes red around the edges.
She didn't ask.
She simply placed the food down, sat beside him for the first time, close enough for their shoulders to nearly touch. They sat in silence. The cars moved, the city breathed, and neither of them said a word. But in that silence, something shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. From then on, she stayed a little longer each morning. Not every day, but often. Sometimes they spoke, fragments of conversation exchanged like pieces of sea glass. A comment about the weather. A mention of a stray cat that had passed by. She learned he once worked with his hands, construction maybe. That he'd had a daughter once, though he never said her name. Their words were rare and precious. But even when they didn't speak, They shared something unspoken, steady. The kind of quiet companionship that asked for nothing, demanded nothing, but gave much. To the rest of the world, it might have looked like nothing. A woman giving coffee to a man on a bench. But to Emily, it was a tether. A reason to step into the day with softness. A reminder that even the simplest acts, a warm drink, a glance held a moment longer, could bind two people across the vast chasm of modern life. In a world that prized speed, efficiency, and spectacle, their relationship remained defiantly small, defiantly slow. And in that slowness, that simplicity, there was something almost sacred. Not love, perhaps, but something adjacent. Something enduring. It wasn't supposed to rain. The forecast had promised clear skies, spring warmth, a soft breeze, the kind of weather you'd imagine for a perfect wedding morning. But as Emily stood by the window of the small room where she had dressed, white lace delicate against her skin, the clouds opened like a sigh, and the rain came down, steady, insistent, uninvited. She stared for a long time, unmoving. Her reflection in the window looked distant, like a woman watching her own life from behind a glass wall. The dress suddenly felt too tight around her ribs. Not from any flaw in fit, but from the weight of what this day meant, and what it had taken to reach it. Love, yes, but also survival. Growth. Silence. The quiet negotiations of self that had shaped her more than any vow could. Friends and family murmured in the background. Laughter mingled with last-minute chaos. Somewhere down the corridor, someone knocked over a vase. There was a small gasp, a splash, a hurried apology. The world went on spinning, wedding or not. Emily didn't turn around. Instead, her mind went elsewhere, to a bench, to early mornings heavy with fog, to warm pastries cradled in paper bags, to the man who had once existed in the margins of her routine, and then, without warning, stepped into the center of her emotional map. She had not seen him in months. Not since the day she had slipped a folded piece of paper beneath his coffee cup, a note with an address and a time. She hadn't expected him to come, but she had needed him to know. A tap at the door. Not a knock. Just a light, hesitant tap. Her friend Julia peeked in, gave her a thumbs up and whispered, "They're ready." Emily nodded, still not speaking. Her body moved on its own, each step slow, her breath shallow. The hallway narrowed, then widened into the venue, a small hall with wooden beams, flowers in mason jars, candles flickering against glass. Everyone turned to her. Everyone smiled. But she didn't look at them. She looked at him. Michael, her fiancé, now waiting at the end of the aisle, his eyes soft, almost unbearably kind. He looked like safety, like certainty, like the choice she had made, consciously, patiently. She had loved him in a different way, not with the hunger of unfinished stories, but with the steadiness of quiet mornings and understanding glances across dinner tables. She walked to him, slowly, intentionally, step after step until she stood beside him, and he took her hand without needing to be told anything about how fast her heart was beating. The ceremony began. And then, just before the vows, just as the officiant cleared his throat, a sound. The door creaked open at the back of the room. Heads turned. A ripple moved through the guests. He stood there, wearing the same worn coat, face a little thinner, beard a little longer. But it was him. The man from the bench. The man Emily had fed and sat beside. The man whose presence had rewritten parts of her without ever asking her to change. He stood with a stillness that cut through the hush. He wasn't wet. He had waited for the rain to stop, clearly. Or maybe he hadn't planned to come at all until the last moment. Emily couldn't know. She met his eyes. And everything else, the flowers, the dress, the rows of seated guests, fell away. For a second, it was just the two of them, held together by the weight of what had never been said. Not regret. Not longing. Something more fragile. Something like recognition. She smiled, barely but fully. He nodded once. Then, silently, he slipped into an empty seat at the back, as if he had always belonged there. Michael squeezed her hand. She turned to him. Their eyes met and he knew, She hadn't hidden this part of her life from him. He had understood that there had been a bond, a peculiar, profound friendship with a stranger who had once meant everything without ever being anything in name. And he had never been threatened by it. That, she realized, was why she was marrying him. She said her vows, her voice steady now. And as the room filled with applause and laughter, as they walked down the aisle hand in hand, Emily's eyes swept over the guests one last time. He was gone. No goodbye. No explanation. Just presence, and then absence, the way he had always moved through the world. But she didn't feel hollow this time. She felt whole. Just as the final notes of the ceremony faded and soft murmurs began to ripple through the crowd, an unexpected sound sliced through the gentle clamor, a precise, measured rhythm of boots on stone. Heads turned instinctively toward the church's grand entrance, where the heavy wooden doors swung open with a solemn gravity that seemed to still time itself. There, in perfect formation, stood 12 Marines, each clad in the immaculate blues of their dress uniform. Their white gloves glowed under the warm light, shoes polished to a mirror shine, and faces set with the kind of unwavering resolve born from years of shared sacrifice and discipline. The room fell utterly silent, as if the weight of their presence commanded a reverence beyond explanation. Emily's breath hitched, her hand tightening around Michael's. She looked back toward the figure beside her, the man from the bench, now standing straighter than anyone had seen him in years. His eyes held a flicker of something long buried, something raw and unguarded. The captain at the front stepped forward with a measured cadence, the rhythm of his movements echoing the precision of their arrival. He came to attention before Emily and executed a flawless military salute, his voice cutting clearly through the hush. On behalf of Alpha Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, we are here to honor the woman who silently sustained a hero for 6 years. A ripple of disbelief swept through the guests, eyes widening, whispers stifled. Emily's gaze never wavered, anchored to the man whose life she had touched in small, unnoticed ways. The captain gestured toward him. This is Sergeant Victor Hale, a Marine who saved 9 lives during an ambush in Fallujah in 2004. After tragedy claimed his family in 2016, he chose to disappear from society, declining all military benefits and living quietly among us unseen. The weight of the revelation pressed on Emily's chest, mixing with a fierce tenderness. She had fed a hero, unknowingly cradled a broken warrior. Another Marine stepped forward, presenting a shadow box bearing a Silver Star medal and a faded photograph. The image captured a younger Victor carrying a wounded comrade through a war-torn street, Captain Duncan among them. He carried me 4 blocks under enemy fire. The captain's voice cracked with emotion, returning for 8 more, despite his own wounds. His valor saved us all. Tears blurred Emily's vision. The man beside her, weathered and unassuming, was more than a silent figure on a bench. He was a testament to unseen courage and resilience. If not for you, Miss Sanchez, the captain continued, Sergeant Hale might never have survived to see this day. Your kindness was his lifeline. Victor's eyes met hers, calm and grateful. I never sought thanks, he said softly. After losing my family, I couldn't face being called a hero. But you saw me, not the uniform, not the medals. You saw me. As the Marines formed a solemn honor guard, stretching from the entrance to the altar, the room filled with a profound quiet. The crowd, once skeptical and whispering, now watched with humbled hearts. Emily realized then that heroism wasn't always loud or celebrated. Sometimes it was a quiet act of kindness that changed a life, one meal, one note, one moment of recognition. And sometimes that moment brings an entire battalion to stand at attention in honor of it. In the lingering stillness that followed the Marines' departure, the room seemed to hold its breath, as if the air itself was heavy with a newfound understanding. Emily stood alone for a moment, the echoes of footsteps and whispered reverence fading into the quiet hum of the world outside. She felt a weight lift, but also a profound shift, a subtle realignment of how she saw herself and the people she had touched without even realizing it. Kindness she reflected, was never about grand gestures or public accolades. It was a fragile thread woven through the fabric of everyday existence, often invisible, easily overlooked. She had given bread and warmth, a moment of presence, not expecting anything in return. Yet those simple acts had quietly stitched together fragments of a broken man's soul, granting him something far more valuable than any medal or title, a reason to hold on, to believe again. The eyes that truly see, Emily understood now, do more than just glance. They recognize the invisible burdens others carry, the scars hidden beneath worn coats and guarded smiles. They affirm existence beyond circumstance, beyond societal labels. To be truly seen was a form of salvation, as crucial as any physical rescue. Victor's story was not just about heroism on a battlefield. It was a testament to the human need for acknowledgement and empathy. His silence had been a fortress built from pain, loss, and guilt, but it was kindness, the quiet, persistent kindness, that had dismantled those walls. Emily's own journey, intertwined with his, revealed the paradox of vulnerability and strength, that the bravest act might simply be to open one's eyes and heart to another's suffering without judgment. In that moment, Emily realized how her own sense of purpose had deepened. The world could be harsh and indifferent, yes, but within it lay countless unseen battles and silent cries. To extend kindness was to say, "I see you. You matter. Your story is not erased." It was a radical act of recognition that demanded courage, humility, and unwavering resolve. This understanding rippled through her being, reshaping her relationships, her hopes, her very view of humanity. She knew now that her smallest gestures had held immense power, not because they changed the world in sweeping motions, but because they changed one person at a time, quietly, deeply, irreversibly. And in that quiet revolution, Emily found not only healing for others, but a profound healing for herself. The quiet table began as a fragile seed planted in the fertile soil of Emily's compassion, but its roots quickly stretched far beyond the modest bakery, where her daily acts of kindness had first taken shape. After the wedding, as the echoes of the Marine's salute still reverberated in her heart, Emily and Michael chose to channel their gift of community and support into something enduring, an initiative that would give voice and nourishment to those whose stories often went unheard. It was a simple idea, deceptively so, a breakfast program for homeless veterans, a quiet space where meals were given freely without questions, without judgment, a place where dignity was the currency and kindness the language. Building the quiet table was not without its trials. Emily found herself navigating a maze of doubts, hers and others. Could one table really matter in a city brimming with hardship? Would those who needed help trust the offer of a meal without strings attached? These questions gnawed at her during the long, solitary hours she spent organizing supplies, recruiting volunteers, and quietly persuading local businesses to join the effort. Yet, beneath the uncertainty lay an unwavering belief that even the smallest acts could ripple outward, that a plate of food could become a lifeline, a connection, a spark of hope in the dark. Each morning, as the quiet table was set with warm plates and steaming coffee, Emily felt the invisible threads weaving a community. Veterans came with hesitant steps and guarded eyes, their burdens etched into their posture, their silence heavy with untold stories. But at the table, surrounded by others who understood pain and sacrifice, walls began to crumble. Conversations blossomed, tentative smiles were shared, and in those moments, Emily saw the profound human need not just to survive, but to be seen and remembered. The program was more than nourishment. It was a sanctuary of empathy, a quiet rebellion against a world that so often turned away. News of the quiet table spread slowly but surely, carried by word of mouth, and the quiet testimonies of those who found solace there. Local volunteers stepped forward, drawn by Emily's steadfast dedication and the palpable warmth that permeated the space. Months turned to years, and the initiative grew organically, a testament to the power of persistent kindness in a world that often demanded spectacle over substance. Emily's days were filled with the rhythms of preparation and connection. Each meal served a reaffirmation of her deepest conviction, that kindness need not be loud to be transformative. Through the quiet table, Emily came to understand that true generosity required more than charity. It demanded presence, respect, and the courage to meet others where they were, without expectation or prejudice. It was a daily practice of humility, a recognition that everyone carried wounds, some visible, many hidden, and that healing often began with the simple act of breaking bread together. As the quiet table became a fixture in the neighborhood, it quietly challenged the assumptions and fears that so often isolate the vulnerable, fostering a community bound by shared humanity rather than circumstance. In the quiet moments after the last guest left and the tables were cleared, Emily often reflected on how far the journey had come. What began as a solitary gesture, a wrapped pastry and a cup of coffee left on a bench, had blossomed into a movement of compassion that touched countless lives. It was not just a story of feeding the hungry, but of restoring dignity, rebuilding trust, and kindling hope. The quiet table was a living testament to the truth that the smallest acts of kindness, sustained with heart and soul, could indeed reshape a world that too often forgot to see its own heroes. Beneath the surface of this story, beneath the layers of hardship and unexpected honor, lies a quiet but profound message, one that challenges the very way we see each other and ourselves. Emily's journey is not simply about generosity or heroism in the conventional sense. It is about the raw, unvarnished truth that every human being, no matter how invisible or broken they may seem, carries a story worthy of recognition. The narrative forces us to confront our own biases and discomforts, the instinct to judge or dismiss those who live on the margins, and invites us instead into a space of empathy and radical acceptance. In a world obsessed with grand gestures, viral fame, and outward appearances, the true heroism in Emily's story is quiet, persistent, and unseen by most. It is found in the daily acts of kindness that ask for no applause, no reward, no acknowledgement. It is found in the simple courage to see someone else fully, to honor their humanity without needing to know their past or their worthiness. This is a courage that is difficult and rare because it demands vulnerability, the willingness to hold space for pain and imperfection, to accept that helping another does not always come with clarity or closure. Victor's silence, his refusal to accept thanks or recognition, underscores the complexity of trauma and the human heart. His story is a reminder that heroism is not a fixed identity, but a lived experience, often marked by suffering and invisibility. The debt he and the Marines symbolically repay to Emily is less about obligation and more about acknowledging a truth that is often ignored, that kindness can save lives in ways that medals never can. This exchange of unspoken understanding reveals a deep interconnectedness, that we are all bound by the need to be seen, to be valued, and to be remembered beyond our hardships. Emily's persistence, despite judgment and doubt, illustrates the power of steadfast compassion to transform not only others but ourselves. Her story teaches us that real change begins with small, consistent choices, to show up, to care, to believe in the worth of another human being even when the world does not. It challenges the notion that our actions must be monumental to matter, and instead elevates the quiet revolutions carried out in kitchens, on benches, and in the hearts of those who refuse to turn away. Ultimately, this story invites us to reconsider what it means to be a hero, not just in the grand, public sense, but in the everyday choices that affirm dignity and humanity. It asks us to live with kindness not for recognition, but because it is the very thread that binds society together, the light that can illuminate even the darkest corners of despair. In embracing this message, we are called to cultivate a world where no one is invisible, where every life is honored, and where the simplest acts of compassion hold the power to heal and transform.